Welcome back to Made for More. I am your host, Holly J. Moore. I am a divorce attorney who is passionate about helping you use the adversity and difficult things in your life to grow and show up as the best version of yourself. Joined today by my producer, Aaron Bender.
One of the ways that I show up as best person of best self is I meditate.
Do you really? Do you meditate?
No, I should. There was a time when I meditated a lot more often than I do now.
Really?
Yeah, it's just, with all of a sudden married and 4 kids, It's like, hey, no meditation time. No, when I'm driving. That's actually a lot of my meditation time is I turn off the podcast and I just sit in the silence of the car and the traffic. What about you?
I don't meditate. I mean, I don't formally meditate. I have found when I've tried to meditate, my mind goes so fast, at all hours of the day and night. And I think for me, it's like, okay, I'm going to make my mind stop and I'm going to meditate. It's like, it's going quadruple the speed that it was. Yeah. So, I pray, I might sit in the hot tub and stare at the sky, things like that. No formal meditation, but, various ways to kind of relax.
We might find this out from Susan, but the key to meditation, I've heard, is not stopping your mind, but listening to it.
We are here today with Susan Kaiser Greenland, mindfulness and real-world enlightenment expert and author of this book, Real World Enlightenment, Discovering Ordinary Magic in Everyday Life. Susan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So I understand you are a former lawyer, now mindfulness expert. I mean, as a lawyer myself, I know that those are probably two opposite ends of the spectrum. So tell us a little bit about your work and why you started down this path.
Well, I joke about being a recovering lawyer, but actually I loved practicing law. And, now I've been practicing meditation for 30 years. I practiced law for about 20 or so years, both in New York and in California. Wow. But I have to tell you, Holly, some of the most mindful people I have ever met as far as mindfulness in daily life are some of the best lawyers I've ever met.
I could definitely see that. But let me ask you, why do you think that is?
Because there's so much overlap in the first stages of mindfulness practice, especially things about non-reactivity, things about, holding back, things about really recognizing and embodying what's happening in your nervous system and being able to settle and ground yourself so that you can see clearly and you have the bandwidth to look at different angles of a problem and complex thinking. Now, of course, I saw plenty of lawyers who had absolutely the opposite of those skills.
Yeah.
But the ones that I most respected were the ones who most of them didn't meditate. They just embodied that. Right. Lawyers and preschool teachers. I think those two areas overlap that way.
That is really interesting. So let's kind of start at the very ground level. What is mindfulness?
Mindfulness is paying attention to what's happening in the present moment, hopefully without layers of opinion, bias, that sort of thing, but being able to really see what's happening within and around you clearly at the moment.
Okay. And what you mentioned, like a mindfulness practice, tell us what a mindfulness practice is.
There's all kinds of them, and that's one of the reasons the new book is more about the themes or the view. Meditation really has 3 parts. It has a view, worldview. It has the practice, which we think of as sitting still, cross-legged on a cushion. Yeah. And it has application, how we apply these things in daily life. So most people think of mindfulness as a formal sitting meditation practice, and that's fantastic, and it really is helpful if you have that. But many, many people, when I first started out, I was a young working lawyer with 2 little kids, not a lot of time for that.
Right.
And so then you have to find other ways to practice, and that's where you think of like anytime, anywhere meditation, short time, anytime. You just drop brief moments of awareness into what you're doing throughout the day.
Okay.
And you can drop in awareness, both the practice, which are kind of grounding strategies about feeling your breathing, listening to sounds, and also you can drop in practices of reframing the way you look at the world, like a little bit more with appreciation, a little less with negativity, a little more open-minded, that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting because we do a segment 1 of the show where we're Aaron and I are kind of discussing what is about to be discussed with the guest. And Aaron mentioned that his kind of meditation time or mindfulness time is in the car. And I think that kind of goes to your point, right? Is just like finding those little moments where you can sort of, just be maybe a little bit still and be aware.
Yeah. And you don't even need to be still. Often, if you really are worked up, it's better to move.
Oh.
But, because you need to release that sort of nervous energy. We see that with kids and we see that with adults a lot. So being able to get out in nature and walk, and really get out of your head and into your body helps downregulate your nervous system. And that's the skill that I think the first skill, the entryway skill that all of us need right now is really being able to bring awareness or mindfulness to the state of our nervous system. And if we're upregulated, if we're a little bit overly excited or upset, being able to settle and ground ourselves.
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I definitely want to talk about, this, depending on when this airs. I mean, we just went through an election. And, tensions are high, emotions are high, I guess, on both sides. So talk a little bit about what are the benefits of mindfulness?
Well, the first benefit of the practice, and I just actually wrote something and sent it out to my newsletter on this issue because one of the things that was really notable about this election, and surprising perhaps to some, is just how evenly the country was divided.
Yeah.
It wasn't as surprising to me because I live in Los Angeles, spend a lot of time in New York now, but I was born and raised in Michigan, and I just came back from spending like 10 days in Michigan.
Okay.
And it was remarkable how every yard sign was like one after another. It was one party, then the next party. It was not even.
Right.
Well, actually it was pretty even, but it wasn't all the same. It was pretty evenly divided. So you figure we're in a world like that. And what can mindfulness, what can awareness, what can meditation do to help? And what it can do is, first, these things we were talking about at the very beginning. There are mindfulness-based tools that help us settle and ground ourselves, settle our nervous systems. Because what happens when our nervous systems get ratcheted up is that our mental bandwidth narrows. Our energy moves into our body to fight or flee or freeze, the fight-flight reaction.
Right.
That's what happens. When that happens, our bandwidth narrows.
Okay.
So mindfulness helps reverse that and helps us ground ourselves so that our mental bandwidth can open. So that's the first thing. And the second piece is the view piece I mentioned earlier too, and the view toward a more holistic perspective. When our nervous systems are more grounded, we can start looking at situations and see the value in other people's opinions, even if they don't agree with us. And we do that with some intellectual humility, by developing a comfort level with not knowing, by some empathy, some compassion, kindness, that sort of thing. So it's the combination of practice and view that really makes this type of practice, this type of way of being in the world, transformative to people.
Okay. Now, you used the term intellectual humility. I love that, but explain more about what that means.
Well, I think it's key. It's my biggest practice. And honestly, I think I might have developed it first practicing law, as you know, from practicing law, you go into something thinking you're as prepared as you possibly can be. You've done everything, all your due diligence, everything you can. And then all of a sudden a new fact comes up that you hadn't thought about. All of a sudden you start getting a different perspective. So when we recognize that no matter how hard we try, we can never really know all the causes and conditions that lead up to this very moment, it really leaves us with very little alternative to be a little bit humble about what we can actually know. And that's not a sad or a miserable thing. That's kind of a relief.
Totally. Yeah, it takes
It's like,
the pressure off. Like, we will never know
does.
all there is to know.
That's right. That's right. We do the best we can. It doesn't mean we give up. We do the best we can. We make the best judgments we can given the circumstances, and then we keep moving forward. So that's the piece of intellectual humility that I think is fantastic, and it's developed in a meditation practice because when you actually settle and all the different thoughts and emotions, they often bubble up a lot at the beginning, but they start to settle. All of a sudden, you start to see on a visceral level just how we are so connected to everyone and everything.
Right. That's beautiful. I want to read a portion of your book that kind of caught my attention. And I think it's particularly, it's probably always relevant because I have in my mind a mantra that says reasonable minds can differ. And it's like, even though you feel you being us, me, we feel so convicted in our own beliefs and our perception of the world and how things are and how things should be. And lo and behold, somebody else who's just as smart and well-rounded and all those great things can think differently. And so I think it kind of goes to that point of intellectual humility. But I want to read this part in your book. It says a common knee-jerk reaction to tough situations and big feelings is to bear down and muscle through. I used to do that. Another common reaction is to ignore them. Both approaches get something wrong. They assume the conscious problem-solving mind is running the show like the chief executive officer of a corporation. So can you talk a little bit about the role that our conscious mind versus our subconscious mind plays in sort of problem solving and these kinds of things? Because I had a coach one time that said, Holly, if you have a really big problem, just think about it before you go to bed and ask the question in your mind before you go to bed. And when you wake up in the morning, like your subconscious will have worked on it all night and you'll likely have some insight in the morning. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And that makes a lot of sense to me. There's just, again, it goes back to, as you mentioned, the intellectual humility part. There's just so little that we can know. If you think that dogs can hear things that we can't hear, if you think bats, they fly and they can navigate in the dark because they're bouncing sound waves off of things and feeling that, they can pick up things. Bees pick up things we don't hear. So it only makes sense that there's an awful lot going on that's mysterious.
Right.
And that mystery is actually very exciting. And then there's some stuff that's not so mysterious, and that's this issue of the nervous system regulation. So that's the piece that we really can do something about, because it's very hard to be able to have that open mind, if not impossible to have that open mind, because we are wired differently. We are wired to pay attention to what scares us. So we're going to naturally, as a survival instinct, pay more attention to the things that we're worried about because they're the things that could actually hurt us and we want to protect ourselves. Yeah. So we're wired to pay more attention to these things that scare us than the good things in life, than the ways that we're connected, than the things we're appreciative of. So those pieces of the mindfulness and meditation puzzle and those types of really simple activities that we can drop into our day at any time start to make a very meaningful shift in how we navigate the world. So, for example, when we're scared about something, we acknowledge those feelings. Like when you're going to bed, for example, you might acknowledge those feelings, want to kind of figure out a plan, but also broaden your vision, your perspective, to think of 3 good things that are happening right now, so that you're balancing out what you're worried about with what is good. Similarly, when you meet that person who is of a very similar feel to you and you really vibe with them, and then you find out, oh wow, I just have a completely different view from them. Instead of closing down, think of what are 3 things that might be different from our perspectives. So those kind of simple activities that we can drop into daily life that don't require sitting on a cushion for 20 minutes a day or 2 hours a day really do start to make a meaningful shift.
Okay. Now, I know that you do work with kids, right? So can you tell us a little bit about your work with kids and how you are able to sort of get kids into a mindfulness practice?
Yeah, well, kids are naturally mindful, really. I mean, we kind of
They're not
we kind of train
poisoned
it
like
out of
adults
them.
with all this other stuff. They're just like pure.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. They don't have all these layers of protective mechanism on
Yes.
top of these feelings that they have of wonder and joy and playfulness.
Right.
So, well, when I started, because I started working with kids, I was one of the very first to do it. I remember I was practicing law, and a researcher from UCLA came and said, can you try doing what you do with elementary school kids with 3 or 4 year olds? I said, no, I can't. It's not possible. She twisted my arm. I went into UCLA. I did those practices with very little kids. And sure enough, they loved them as long as you bring a sense of playfulness
Yeah.
and really key into their own innate sense of wonder and joy and inquisitiveness and curiosity. So the key with working with kids is to make these practices into games and activities so that
Okay.
it's fun. I never wanted a child to get to high school and go, oh, mindfulness. That was awful. That was
Yeah.
always something I didn't want. But if you make things fun, if you turn it into an activity, we play, we do a little bit of mindfulness practice, then we talk about it, that sharing, and we apply it to how it might help in daily life. That really does start to make a change in kids' lives and in their parents. I can't tell you the number of parents who have come to me and said, I tried to meditate, I've gone to classes, I've gone on retreats, I just couldn't do it. But when I started playing these games for kids,
Yeah.
all of a sudden something locked in.
Yeah, I read that somewhere in some of your material that the parents actually kind of became, it was only through the kids and having the kids do the mindfulness activities that then the parents kind of latched on and was like, oh, I'm doing this too. Like, this is great.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
maybe
Yep.
maybe
It
the
happens all
lesson
the
there
time.
is like adults need it to be a game too and need to approach it with
I think
playfulness.
so.
Yeah.
I
Maybe,
think so. I think we adults just don't play enough.
yeah.
We just don't let go and have fun and really connect with the joy that's in and around us all the time. And it makes sense again for a lot of reasons, including that negativity bias we talked about
Yeah.
before, how we're wired to pay attention to the things that worry us because those are the things that are a threat.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We did a podcast with a guest last week. He had written a book about fun and incorporating fun into your life as an adult. And I think he said as adults, we are like a fun starved society. And very much along the lines of what you said is like, we just don't really grab on to that sense of playfulness and joy and that childlike wonder about the world.
Yep, we don't prioritize it. We
Yeah.
don't prioritize it.
Yeah. So, do you, for the people watching or listening right now, thinking, okay, I could see how mindfulness could be beneficial to my life. How do they start doing? What do they start doing?
Well, there are now so many apps out there that are really easy entryways in. There's all sorts of classes and teachers. It is important to know what you're getting and who you're learning from. There's some differences in approach. But basically, I really like the Healthy Minds app. It comes out of the University of Wisconsin in Madison. It's research based, so that's a good one. And there's so many other good apps. And even simple things like the Calm app or the Headspace app, those things. And you can just start by finding the downloads that really resonate with you. All of us are different. We're all wired a little differently. Some of us want to be more active, need to be
Yeah.
more active. Some of us very quiet, very still, something in between. So really taking the time to try a couple of things that are online, listen to them. Maybe somebody's voice will sound great. Maybe somebody's voice will be irritating. Don't judge yourself. Just keep going until you find something that, okay, this is landing with me.
Right.
And I really encourage people to find something that is grounded in the real world, that then they can use to apply to their daily life. Because many people come to this as a spiritual practice. It is now a spiritual practice for me. But at the same time, I think for the way in for most people, it's to see some results pretty quickly about, oh, wow, this makes sense to me. And wow, I feel better when I do this. Oh, I notice I'm a little less reactive. If we are just a little less neurotic, a little less reactive, that has a ripple effect on everybody around us.
Yeah. Okay. So I was going to ask the question, like, what kind of results could people expect to see? But I think you kind of answered it. It would be to be less reactive. Maybe you feel like your nervous system is more regulated. What else should people be expecting in terms of results?
Or feeling that you have some tools, feelings that you're building awareness of when, oh, I start to snap at my husband. I've been married for, gosh, how long now? 35, 36 years. I start to snap at my husband when I'm really tired or when I'm hungry.
Right.
So maybe being able to interrupt that, or even if you do snap, say, oh, I'm sorry, honey, I was tired. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So building awareness first, the awareness of the connection without judging yourself and beating yourself up. That's one of the first things that happens. And then developing these tools, like just you're rushing out the door in the morning and you've got your briefcase and you're dealing with the lunch and you got the phone like this, and stopping just before you get to the door and grounding yourself and taking a couple deep breaths and settling yourself so you go out into the world in a more collected way. Right. Doing these type of simple activities that interrupt our automatic behavior, all of a sudden we really start seeing a shift. When something makes you mad, you're at the office and something went wrong, or you're at the car rental place and they don't have your car, you start to feel these strong feelings. You notice the feelings. It's okay. They're justified. But what are the good things that are happening right now too?
Yeah.
Are there 3 good things I can be really happy for? And sometimes those good things are really granular. Like, I'm happy that I'm actually able to stand here right now and that I'm able to have the time to figure out the car thing.
Right.
And then that again helps us start to just shift our perspective a little bit. And that starts to shift the way we are in the world and the ripple effect of how other people start seeing us, viewing us, and responding to us.
Yeah. So again, because we just had the election and emotions are kind of high, what should people do? Because I feel like, I guess I should just speak for myself. I do these things and I step out of my front door into the world with, a heightened level of awareness, heightened compared to what I was because I took a couple deep breaths. And, and then I make the mistake of going on Facebook and seeing everybody talking about, like the opposite political view that I have. And it just immediately sort of, makes my blood boil. Like, what do we do in that situation?
Well, the first thing we do is acknowledge our feelings, and I have seen a lot out there that has people go straight to empathy or compassion or equanimity. No, first, this makes me mad, this is legitimate to be upset about this. So acknowledging the feelings, that's the first thing.
Okay.
And then recognizing that this type of pain, these type of feelings, they're unavoidable, but adding another layer of suffering, that's where we have some capacity to change.
Right.
And so we're not going to then get on Facebook, start commenting, and engaging with people.
Wait, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't, type out an angry response.
Yeah. Well, it's not going to settle us down. That's for sure.
Yeah, it just makes it worse. Yeah.
And if you do it once, you did it once, it's not the end of the world, but just not adding on the layer after layer of suffering. We can't do anything about that first hit. Right. And we have to acknowledge those feelings. But then there is something we can do about not adding to it.
Yes. I was trying to find the part in your book that I saw this morning where you talk about suffering and how suffering is unavoidable. Suffering is a part of life. But to your point, like, we can definitely do things to minimize it and not continue on in the suffering, right?
Yeah.
And
There's in Buddhism, which is where, a lot,
yes.
there's meditation in all sorts of religious traditions. Buddhism is one of them. And in Buddhism, in relation to this, there's a parable, and it's the parable of the two arrows. And the idea is you can't do anything if you're hit with the first arrow, but do you want to then go ahead and shoot a second arrow into yourself?
Yeah.
So like the shorthand is, all right, so something lousy happened. It happened. Feel those feelings. It's not going to help you to like put a wet blanket over it and pretend that you don't feel bad, because that's just going to make things worse. So feel the feels, but don't shoot another arrow into yourself.
Yeah. 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 To use my, political Facebook example, I will say I am not the keyboard warrior. I learned that lesson about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, where it's like something is irritating but it passes. In 10 seconds, I have forgotten about it. I don't respond. I keep scrolling. In 10 seconds, I forget about it, versus if I type out my angry keyboard warrior response, then the anger just goes on, because then it's like, okay, now I'm even more invested in it. And then they respond again, and then other people add in, and it just like perpetuates the suffering. It is so much more peaceful to keep scrolling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And that kind of thing is happening on social media all the time.
Yes.
And also in a different way, it's happening in offices, it's happening in homes, it's happening in schools, it's happening in families. I mean, this is going to be a pretty lively Thanksgiving for some families.
Oh gosh, that's true. Yes. Oh wow. Yes, that's right. Wow.
Yeah, so developing these kind of skills now is not the worst idea.
Right.
And, and again, the idea of, especially if you think Thanksgiving, I always like to talk about a practice with people I'm working with of a gratitude walk. So if weird Uncle Harry's giving you trouble at the Thanksgiving Day table, you can get up and leave, and walking again, getting into nature, getting into sun, movement, that has a way of grounding you.
Right.
And with each step, think of something you're grateful for. And, one of the things you might be grateful for is that you didn't lose your cool with Uncle Harry. And that's the kind of thing.
Yes. Well, I think if there's one thing I've gleaned from this conversation, it's that we need to get this episode out before Thanksgiving. And and really encourage people to sort of develop this mindfulness so that they can go out into the world and suffer less. From being around the people that might have differences in opinions and different worldview. And we don't really have to suffer because of that. We could actually have some intellectual humility and sort of use it as a learning tool and not suffer from it.
Yeah, and remember that, emotions are contagious. And so if we're sort of putting out good energy, if we're putting out kindness and compassion and love and wisdom and understanding, there is a ripple effect to that.
Yes, I'm writing that down. Energy is contagious.
Yeah, emotions.
Put
too.
out, yeah. Oh, yeah. You said emotions, actually. Emotions. Didn't you? Yeah.
I might have said either one, but
they're both
'cause
true. It's
of them
both
are
true.
contagious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been in those rooms where somebody walks in the room and sucks all the energy out, or somebody walks in the room and is very buoyant and just adds all sorts of uplifting energy.
Yes. I love that. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Susan. I hope that after listening to this, we will all go out into the world with a renewed sense of mindfulness and awareness.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. This has been fun.
Great. I've got just a little bit more to say. My biggest takeaway from Susan is that she's right. Emotions are contagious. So be the contagion that spreads love and light and happiness and joy to the rest of the people of the world. And I know you can do it because you were made for more.